This week in a conversation, I have a very important guest. I have author Mark Budman. Um, he is Russian American and he's written an immigrant story. I have to say, this week it's all about immigrant fiction. And I'm so thrilled about it because Bittersweet Memories of Last Spring is also an immigrant story. So I am we're going to be speaking about his interesting title, The Most Excellent Immigrant. Interesting. But before we get to Mark, interesting conversation with me, I just want to remind you, take a quick moment to remind you that Bittersweet Memories of Last Spring, my new novel, is available everywhere, including Walmart. If you go online, Walmart, you want to buy it, you can still buy it there too. So, yeah, no excuse calling me or emailing me, letting me know that you don't know where to find Bittersweet Memories of Last Spring. Okay, so it's everywhere. Like I said last time, I'm very much interested in seeing everyone has a copy of this book so you could read it, so you could you could have a better understanding of what it's like for a new immigrant, new arrival, how they navigate to this new country, uh, different cultures, and trying to immerse in the pursuit of their American dream. Again, also, don't forget to support this channel. And the best way, as I always say, the best way to support this channel is to subscribe to it. And if you already have subscribed, you can always encourage your friends and neighbors and fans and other readers and viewers to subscribe too. And of course, if you like this video, let me know in the comment box at the bottom of the video and like it too. That way you will further the cause of making this channel one of the most important one on YouTube when it comes to literature. All right. So let's get started. Again, my name is Ardain Isma, and I'm here this afternoon with a very interesting author, an impeccable writer, an old friend. I'm here with Mark Budman, and we're going to be talking about her new novel titled The Most Excellent Immigrant.
Right.
Interesting topic.
Yes, I thought that was a funny title because I mean, if it's already excellent, so how could be the most excellent? So that's something which just an immigrant who is learning English, he could come up with a title like that, the most excellent, not just excellent, but the most excellent. All right. So that's already was a hint of humor right there in the title.
And you know what? I did a search online as to find out the many groups that write and also that talk about immigrant stories.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being because I've written several stories, short stories, novellas, and also now obviously is the newest one, which is Bittersweet. So it's an immigrant journey. So I feel more and more compelled to go back to my own roots and to find people like you who truly believe in expressing a narrative that mainstream America is still trying to understand, although we are a country of immigrants.
Right, right.
How do you understand that? What does that say to you, Mark?
That says to me that we immigrants, we flock to each other, right? Birds of feather, they flock together. So that when we see somebody who's an immigrant like you and me, who writes a book, that's I think this is with the first for us to read before we read anything else, because we want to see how other people did that, how they went to the same path as we did. We chose a certain path. but not too many people do that. It's a big number, but compared to the number of natives, it's still a small number. So that's why we want to see how other people experience the same thing what we did, and that's why we are interested in each other's books. That's how I see it.
Mhm. And I can see in the story, the protagonist himself is the interpreter. And right off the bat on chapter one, the interpreter really, uh, and his wife, the babysitter, uh, somehow there is some sort of the interaction between them, I want to say. Uh, you could see the interpreter as being the person who dictates, I would say, in certain terms. Maybe the word dictate might be a little bit too strong, but leads, I would say. Am I correct on that?
No, I wouldn't say it's correct. You are correct because the interpreter leads maybe only in his imagination, but it's a partnership. In a partnership, there is no leader because there is a hierarchical structure. Sometimes there is somebody on the top, somebody in the bottom, somebody is an employer, somebody is an employee, but it's not a partnership. That's a hierarchical structure, and a family, it's not hierarchical structure usually, unless you're talking about an old type of patriarchal family.
Right.
But this one I described, this is a partnership. There is no leader, there is no followers. Both of them equal. In sometimes in certain areas, one of them leads. In other areas, the other one leads. So no, that's the interpreter is not the boss, and his wife is not the follower. They are equal. That's how
Yeah.
I see it. Even though sometimes in his head he thinks he's superior, so is she. Maybe in her head she thinks she's superior, but in real life, in reality, they're both equal. We make decisions together.
You know what? I like the passage where the interpreter goes, I think, in the way from the interpreter stopped by a store where they have those many different
Yeah.
artifacts. Yeah, and when make reference to historical accounts, for example, Stalin, and and also with Hitler. Yeah, my gosh, I mean, right off the bat. So, there is something in American psychic, I would say, when we make reference to Russian historical figures, and when we try to compare them, I would say, with others from the Western societies, um, there's always an element of bias in it. I'm not saying just because you make reference to Stalin, but I'm saying this in particular. American Russophobia is based on what historical figures and contemporary history of Russia, have done as opposed and their opposition to Western influence. And average and ordinary Americans, the way they see it, whether you're talking about a current Russian leader or historical Russian figure, what's in the mind of average American is Russian. So it's something that sometimes I question, even with my colleagues at the university level, uh, because I think that the best way to understand a society, to understand someone, is not just by a few words someone would say, few bad words someone would say, but by, as intellectuals, really explain the reason why certain things happen. You see what I mean? So that's why I always try to see things not just in one light, because they say many things about Haitians also, and I think that the history of Haiti itself uh, uh, is one that is unique, but also is one that is the root cause also of contemporary history of Haiti is so sorrowful. It's so sad. It's so, and so that's why when I read that passage, immediately that's come to mind.
Yeah, I bet you thought about Duvalier, right? Immediately,
Exactly.
right?
That's what I'm talking
Yeah,
about. Yeah.
he's mini Stalin, right? Mini Stalin, because he was in a smaller place, right? Stalin it was a large place, and he was a large Stalin, but they could have been interchangeable. If Duvalier was born in Russia, he could have become a Maxi Stalin, and if Stalin was born in Jamaica, he could have been a mini Duvalier, right? So something like that. But yes, you're right. The history of Russia, or maybe Haiti, even that they are different from the West, because in Russia that they liked, and the people prefer to have somebody, a dictator, a czar, a dictator. Like they changed the czar, who was an absolute monarch. They changed the dictator, who also was a kind of absolute monarch. And even today, then even though Putin doesn't have a power of Stalin, but he's a tyrannical leader. I mean, there's a little bit of difference, of course, because he couldn't. Now let's say we're making jokes in Russia about Putin. This is allowed. You couldn't possibly make a joke about Stalin in his time, but that difference is only on the surface. But in reality, he runs the country. He runs the country the way he wants. So same like Duvalier ran the country the way he wanted, and where he ended up. Same place. I hope Putin will end up the same place as Duvalier ended.
And you
Right?
know something? Most people don't realize that Russia was the first European country to recognize Haitian independence in
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
1804.
Right.
People don't understand that.
That was back probably in Napoleonic time, right?
Napoleonic time, yeah,
Yes,
in
yes.
1804.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
when Napoleon himself was defeated in Haiti.
Right. Yeah, I was reading that. I am the history student, so I was reading a little bit about is Haiti the first democracy there in the Caribbean? I think that was
The first black republics in the Americas, and the
right.
second only to the United States as an independent country, as early
Right.
as 1804.
Right. Yes. So
So
that's
the story of Haiti is a tragedy, it's a travesty, quite
yeah,
frankly,
right.
a modern day history of the country.
Yeah, yeah.
A very sad reality, you know.
I was trying to remember that was a very famous revolutionary who actually started the independence war. But I forgot the name in Haiti.
Toussaint
Uh,
Louverture, I mean?
yes, that's him. Right?
Toussaint Louverture, yeah.
Descent Louverture, right?
Right.
That's if I pronounce it correctly.
You're right. He became an international figure in the fight
Right.
against
Right.
slavery,
Right.
uh, for emancipation and all that. Yeah.
Right.
So that's just a quick question I wanted to make to your book. And on page 43, when you make reference about Latinos, Asian, Africans, you went into this neighborhood and the interpreter, I was going
Right.
there. Immediately I see me. Yeah, it's true. The reason why I see me because I grew up in a Miami neighborhood.
Right.
And in my
I'm
neighborhood,
reading a book now, so I know it.
it was a stew of these people.
Mhm.
Although we may be ethnically different, or linguistically different, but we find common ground in so many levels,
Right.
And these are present things which forced us to become, just one because we're fighting for a dream, which is conquering the American dream.
That's right. That's right. Because the immigrants, as I said, they are brothers on some level, not genetically,
Yeah.
but mentally, right?
Yeah. But let me ask you a question. How did you feel writing this passage right here when you were writing it? So how did you feel?
That again, that I am very curious in different cultures. I've always been that way. When I grew up, when in the place I grew up, it was a very multi-ethnical place. Now it's an independent country, but it used to be it used to be a part of the Soviet Union. But it was so funny that my grandfather, he was born in 1905.
Okay.
So by the time he was like 35, he lived in three different countries.
Well,
And that without leaving his house. He lived in the same house, but because the borders moved. So that was so multi-ethnical. So I grew up in a place like that. So I grew up in a place when they talk different languages, and those languages were not even related to each other. Let's say the Moldovan language is a Romanian type, so it was like it came from Latin, and the Slavic languages that are other people were talking about, they came, of course, from a different root. And the Jewish language they're talking about was German-based or Hebrew-based. So they have mixture of different languages. So that's why it was when I see that a mixture of different people there, people coming from a Spanish-speaking country, people coming from English-speaking country, from French-speaking country. It's always interesting. That gives you an impact. It gives you it brings up your creativity in you. I like to be in an environment like that.
yes, me too. Me too.
Right, right.
Because I find it's like it gives me a feel that I'm home, surrounded by all these people. When I was down in Miami and I was a young college professor
Mhm.
in Hollywood, Florida, there were a lot of immigrants from Eastern and Central Europe. So some of the students, they were Romanian students. Because I know you were born in Moldova, but
Right,
you're Slavic speaker.
right.
And you
Russian.
speak the Moldovan language too?
I used to speak it, but not anymore because I left the country. It was 42 years ago, actually.
Long
In
time
this a month, it was a 42nd anniversary. So I speak very little. I know a couple of poems, but that's all I.
That's it. That's it. Now, because I know there's eastern region of Moldova, which is Transnistria, and
Yeah,
the, the
Transnistria, right? Right.
the majority of the people there, I think, they're Russian speakers. I think.
That's correct. Right. In Transnistria, the majority of the people are Russian speaker. That's why it's kind of independent now, and Putin is looking to take it to himself even now.
Oh,
But yes, it's a very multi-ethnic and speak a lot of different languages.
not language. And those students, they were telling me, they were giving me interesting stories about how um, growing up in Romania or in Slovakia and I had students from all over the place, even from Serbia. I had Serbian students too, and many of them were Slavic, but different language, different type of Slavic languages.
Right.
And then I would say, you guys are Slavs, so you should celebrate a Slav day and the classroom. And then they would bring different thing, Mark, different thing. And I said, well, there's no such a specific culture that we say Slav. We are Serbian, and she is, how do you call that? On the top of Serbia, then you've got not Croatia.
Croatia,
You
right?
have Croatia, and then you have
Right.
the Slovaks. So and I just like you, I would say for me, if you speak French, you're Latin. If you speak, Spanish, or these are Latin languages. But listening to me speaking French, so it doesn't sound too much as the kind of Latin languages that we are used to. For example, Spanish or Portuguese or Romanian language. But French
Uh,
also is Latin, and people realize that. So I love being in the middle of immigrants, so we can talk about our problems, our worries, our anxieties sometimes, especially for new immigrants. I've
right.
lived it. I don't know about you, but I have lived it. The anxiety. When you find yourself, we moved when I was very young, so it's a feeling, quite frankly, when I was reading those parts, and throughout the book, by the way, you make reference into that, and that pleases me immensely.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes. You mentioned that different places like Serbia and places like that. At one point, back in the last century, they had a tendency to integrate. So let's all those little countries like Serbia and Bosnia and places like that, they got together and they formed a new country, Yugoslavia, which wasn't happened before. And the end of the century, that was a tendency to have it separate, and the Yugoslavia fell apart, and they had a war. Serbia was fighting the other places. So this is showing you that that even within those little countries, it could be something that different type of development. So one time they want together, one time they want to separate. So that's you could never predict what will happen with the places, multi-ethnic places. So it could be people could live in peace, or they could have a war. So that's same place happens in every other country, that people fight each other and then they live in peace. So that's not only for the immigrants to do that, but the more multi-ethnic place it is, the more dynamic it becomes. That's what I could see.
Let me ask you something now. Can you give us, at least teach us a little bit, historical lesson regarding, I know Yugoslavia, you mentioned it, because I know in Bosnia itself is divided into three main ethnic group, which is Serbs, Croats, and people always say Muslim, Bosnian Muslim, but what are they? Because Muslim is a religion, is not an ethnicity. So are they Croats converted into Muslim? Are they Serb converted into Muslim? Could you teach us a little bit?
Yes. Again, I'm not a teacher of that part of the country, but I know a little bit about it. So that all these parts, Greece and Yugoslavia, which is former Yugoslavia, Romania, Bulgaria, that all was taken over in the 16th century by the Turks, Ottoman Empire.
Right.
And Ottoman Empire was, of course, it was and still is a Muslim country. So they didn't force actually per se people to become Muslims, but a lot of people did. So that a lot of Bosnians converted, that some of the Albanians converted too, and that they intermixed. And they, of course, when those countries became independent from Turkey, they had some ethnical problems and some religious problems. So there is one place, particularly in Serbia, it's in the news now, it's called Kosovo. Kosovo. Yes, I don't know much Serbian, but there is a Serbian poem, something about something Bole, about Bole and Kosovo Pole. Kosovo Pole, was a field, a very famous field, when they had a big battle between the Serbian army and the Ottoman army, and the Serbians lost, and that was right in Kosovo. So Kosovo kind of has a very, very famous place in Serbian history, and that was actually one of the birthplaces, some say, of the Serbian nation. And now it become mostly people who live there are ethnic Albanians or Muslims, and that's why they want to be independent. And it's very difficult for the Serbians to see it, because they see Kosovo as a part of
their country,
part of Serbia. So that's why they have a lot of friction.
Well, see, Mark, you just say they were Kosovo Albanian, but yes, when it comes to Bosnia, what are they? Croat Bosnian or Serb Muslim who become, an entity? What are they ethnically speaking?
Albanians are very different ethnically from everybody else.
Because they're not Slavic.
They're not Slavic, but right, they're not like anybody.
Right.
Anybody. So there are few people in Europe, as you know, which are ethnically different from everybody else. Okay. Like Finns, the Finns, they're different, right? that Estonians, Latvians, and
Lithuanians.
Lithuanians, they're also different. That in Spain they have some groups which are totally different from everybody. Basques, if you've heard
The
that,
Basque, yeah, from Spain,
the
yeah,
Basques,
between
they
Spain and
right,
Spanish.
right. So it's in Romania was something a little bit similar to it, because Romania, part of it also was occupied by Turkey, Turkey, but Ottoman Empire. And there was a war. Russia had multiple wars with Turkey. And back in Napoleonic times, by the end of Napoleon's time, 1812, Russia defeated the Ottoman Empire, and they took the eastern part of Romania to themselves. And that houses Moldovan Republic became separate from Romania. There used to be one people, but now for 200 years they are separate people. So it's always like that. It was very dynamic there. So things changed. It was different.
I read War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, so
Right.
I can see the thing. But you know what? One thing that's really surprising me, Russian literature developed in the 19th century as one of the most powerful ones in the world. At a time when Russia was not such a powerful country, it's a huge country, but not really for Western European standard, was not really. Of course, the Russian elite emulates at that time the Western Europe, Western values. Even in the book itself, Tolstoy, a lot of it was in French, which was easy for me, to read that.
Right.
So why was that? Why do you think that Russian literature developed in that period of time? So
yes.
strongly.
Yes. So that actually, yes, Russia in 16th century was very lucky. That because it was a relatively small country, but it was nobody actually was living to the west of Russia. There was an empty place basically. It used to be that Mongolian under Genghis Khan, they owned part of that country, but their place fell apart and there was nobody there. China was too weak to take over. So the Russians were lucky, and they got only Siberia just for nothing. They sent several hundred people, and
they control it, right?
And they took control of the most gigantic land mass ever that they took over. So that's how Russia became big. Now, but how did it become great? That's a different story. That has nothing to do with the size, because most the writers who lived in the European part of Russia, and they didn't live in Siberia. Very few did, but most of them did not. And how they became so great, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I know that some writers were not even ethnic Russian, but they wrote in Russian. Let's say Gogol. Nikolai Gogol was a very famous Russian writer, but he was not ethnical Russian. He was Ukrainian, but he wrote in Russian. So because Russian culture was dominating, and even people who were not ethnically Russian, they wrote in Russian. But how it became so big, so famous, I don't know. That's a question for somebody who has more knowledge in literature than I do.
Right. And that brings me to page 45, when you make reference to the interpreter as being once was a conscript of the Soviet army. So am I talking to the interpreter now? I mean, a conscript for you?
Right. As I said, that everything I write is based on real life, but it's fictionalized.
Oh yeah, we know that.
Right. So Mark, I was when I went to college. That in Russian at that time in the Soviet Union was mandatory conscription for all the males. So that unless you go to college, and then you take in college you take some kind of military courses, and then you take in the summer you go to a military camp and exercise there, and then you get, by the time you graduate, you become a lieutenant of reserve lieutenant. So I was specifically, since I was a electrically chemical engineer altogether. So I was in a chemical, doing some chemical work in the army. So I went there and I studied it, and I was actually, in reality, I graduated with I also was a lieutenant reserve. So this interpreter, of course, it took after me, and he was a conscript in a way. Yeah, so he was also a lieutenant in the army. So that I got to shoot AK-47 and even a machine gun. So that was my
Well,
only
that's
time when
why
I did it.
that's why military people, that's what they do. They learn the
Right, right,
the trade and the skill.
right. So that
Now
was the only
on
time I held.
there's one where you went to a love story in the time of a blizzard, because I know you don't have to live in Russia to face blizzard. If you live in Massachusetts, in Boston, you will face some blizzard. I have a lot of relatives who live in Boston.
Right.
So yeah, but that love story evolved, on such a cold night when the interpreter creeped into the it's a very funny the way you twist that around, and the dialogues. It's just like imaginary dialogue of the way you do that. Did you study also human? It's more like neurons, or it's just like neurological type of I would say imagery that you had when you were writing this particular line, wasn't it? No, because and in the pure of imagination, the interpreter thinks so, and the wife would think probably the same thing, and the interpreter would think something else, and the wife would probably think the same thing. It's just like that. You're reading the psychic of these two characters to create a beautiful novelistic prose. That's what I was going to say.
Yes, this story is structured a little bit different, right? It has a repetition, and it's based on the sum of the symbolistic Russian poetry of the beginning of the 20th century. Okay. They had a structure like that. It's a repetition, but it repeats. It's like spiral. It repeats on the same thing, but it's not exactly the same because it goes up and up and up, but it's in a different level. So it's kind of a repetition which is based on itself. So when it repeats the same thing, but a little bit different. And that's what it was. So this is a combination of two people. So they speak it. It's like they are singing together, and but they're not singing the same thing. They a little bit off note, and it becomes something totally different. It's not just the sum of two parts. When you add, it's more than that. So when it's not thinking of one person, not thinking of a second person, but together they create something totally different. And that was the idea. So that's the idea of a spiral, and the idea of combining two thoughts of two people together. So that's yes.
And the last on the paragraph, the last chapter, which is all the most, where you make mention of all the most excellent immigrants. Could you please it has a pillow to 4, and then which is the last chapter, I would say, of the story. And then the last paragraph, all the most excellent immigrants were happy for them. Even the goldfish named Lubyov, who now, swam merrily from far, far, far away. Could you please give us, you don't have to tell the plot now, but give us a little bit.
Yes. If you remember the very first story, which starts the whole collection, there was right. He was burying the goldfish. So that's so I just wanted to have. This is a collection of those stories, which each story is separate, but I wanted to interlink them. So that it starts with the burying of this fish, but this fish is not dead because in my idea that nothing dies. I mean, it goes from one dimension to another.
Mm-hmm.
It's still alive someplace else. So even it was buried in the first story, or first chapter, if you want to say it. So it's still alive in the last chapter, but it's just flowing. It's just swimming some part in a different dimension, a different world, but it's still alive. That was something to connect the first chapter, the first story, to the last. So
And you know
that's
what? Even though this may be metaphorical, but in the reality, this is what happens to us as writers, long after we passed on. This earth will remain. Or the best way to immortalize our life is through our writing.
that's right.
So this is a very powerful last paragraph in the story here. I'm honored, to be one of the first people to read it. Now, which brings me to these questions. When will the public get a chance to read it?
This collection should come out on October 20th of this year.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yes,
that's
it's October 20th, and it will come up from the publisher of my previous book. It's called Livingston Press, which is the University of Western Alabama, which is very strange for me that an immigrant, and this Western Alabama, it would seem to me so American, and and here I am an immigrant, and I'm published by the most American place there is, University of Western Alabama. It's Livingston Press, October 20th of this year.
Okay, great. And then because we've been talking for the longest, every time we talk, Mark, we can talk forever. Now, my last question, any advice you want to give to young generation of immigrants who would want to dive into the same alley of writing and from a perspective of an immigrant? Any advice you might want to give to
Yes, the immigrant writers, that I would say that don't listen to anyone, break any rules they could give you. But if you break a rule, better have a reason to do that. Don't break it willy-nilly, and break it only if it works for you.
Beautiful. That's right. And on that beautiful note, I'm just going to say it's been more than a pleasure to have my old friend once more end the conversation.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you taking your time to talk to me, and it's always a pleasure.
All right, great.